The Disappointment Podcast, Episode 3. My name is Sang. I'm a professional disappointment. This podcast is meant for entertainment purposes only. It is not intended to provide medical advice and professional health recommendations. If you or anyone you know is struggling with ill health, be it physical and or mental, please seek help from your nearest health centers and hospitals. Before I begin this episode, I'd like to direct your attention to our social media pages that we have launched recently. If you liked updates and highlights to our contents, please do follow us on Instagram at The Disappointment Podcast and TikTok at The Disappointment Podcast. In this episode, I would highly suggest listeners who are under the age of 18 to refrain from listening or have your parents by your side to advise you at all times, because I will be using a lot of vulgar words that do not conform to the norms of the society. I do not encourage the use of curse words in any circumstances. The World Health Organization, or WHO, has defined health as a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmary. In previous episodes, we have looked at both physical and mental aspects of health and how they cannot be taken apart. In today's episode, we will look at another equally important determinant of health, the social aspect. Our listeners who are keen about public health would have come across the concept of social determinants of health. The WHO defines it as the condition in which we live, we are born, we grow, we work, and age. They are groups of social factors that influence our health. Previously, we talked about genetics and lifestyle factors and how they impact our health. These are called biological factors. Apart from making changes to our lifestyle choices, these biological factors are generally non-modifiable, i.e., we can't change them, at least not for now. We also mentioned briefly in episode 1 about the environmental factors such as childhood trauma and social injustice in terms of racism and discrimination. These are examples of the social determinants of health. Other factors include economic stability, things like poverty, employment status, food security, house stability, education, being access to education, enrollment in higher education, as well as language and literacy. Health and healthcare, both accessibility and health literacy. And lastly, the neighborhood or built environment, for instance, quality of the housing and the safety of the neighborhoods and the environment we live in. It is hard to accept that in a society there will always be some people who are more well off in terms of income, education, status, safety, and other social determinants of health, while others, which form the majority of a population, will struggle to secure all the basic means to social well-being. Ultimately, there will be differences in health status amongst the group. We call this health inequities, which means the unfair and avoidable differences in health among population groups defined socially, economically, demographically, or geographically. In countries at all levels of income, health and illness follow a social gradient. The lower the socio-economic position, the worse the health. For example, There's a difference of 18 years of life expectancy between high and low income countries. In 2016, the majority of 15 million premature deaths due to non-communicable diseases, or NCDs, occur in low and middle income countries. The relative gaps within countries between poorer and richer subgroups for diseases like cancer have increased in all regions across the world. Why are social factors important in determining health status of a population? Well, a lot of illnesses have their root cause in social problems. In medical school, we are taught that pathology of diseases, often focusing on narrow areas of histology, anatomy, physiologies, or other factors at an individual level, are biological factors or biological causes. This is completely fair because doctors and medical practitioners deal with health of an individual patient. However, once the patient leaves the clinic or hospitals and go back into the society, there are a whole host of other factors beyond the scope of a doctor in the clinic or hospital. I'll give you an example. Have you heard about the disease cholera? Doctors are trained to recognize that cholera are caused by the bacteria Vibrio cholerae found in unclean water. People become ill when they consume the contaminated water. Signs and symptoms include explosive diarrhea and vomiting. If left untreated, it could kill the patient due to dehydration. Therefore, treatment often include replacing the lost water and minerals with fluid rehydration therapy and also antibiotics to kill the bacteria. When we really think about it, the real problem here is poverty. Without the means to treat contaminated water and sewage, people are left to consume contaminated water. These people are often poor people from poor parts of the world. You rarely see cholera in a developed country. Let me tell you a story that relates cholera to Brunei. In 1571, the Spanish began their attack on Brunei. This war is called Perang Castilla. Does it sound familiar? At some point during the war, the Spanish managed to capture the capital city, Kota Batu. Sultan of Brunei had to retreat to Jurudong in order to plan a counterattack. After less than a year occupying Kota Batu, the Spanish left the city for the Philippines. Some say that the Bruneian warriors managed to drive the invaders out, but there are some people who say that the Spanish had to leave because they were falling ill from the outbreak of cholera and dysentery in Brunei. Now that's what I call a holy shit. Poverty is an important social determinant of health. Another factor that's equally important is the social and racial discrimination. I grew up as a minority in Brunei. You have to understand that in Brunei, there's about 500,000 of people in total, majority of which belongs to a dominant race and religion that is Malay and Islam respectively. The rest are mainly Chinese, South Asians like Indians, Sri Lankans, and Bangladeshi, and other Southeast Asian groups like Filipinos and Indonesians. It's like Singapore but in reverse, because instead of having mostly Chinese like Singapore does, we have mostly Malays. Like anywhere else in the world, the minorities are always dominated by the majorities. Conflicts are bound to happen between groups that differ in culture, beliefs, and ideologies. Fortunately, there has been no major conflicts between different groups in Brunei, and it is unlikely that there will be one, and here's why. We are less likely to fight one another because we are more alike than you think. There are so much more similarities than differences between us. And actually, I think we secretly love each other, but we don't say it because we Asians. However, racial discrimination still exists in Brunei, like everywhere else in the world. It does not feel good to be judged because you're of different race, beliefs, speak different languages, eat different food, etc. Growing up, I felt like a loser and don't quite fit in. It has affected my self-esteem and instilled a lot of fear in my mind, leading to anxieties issues later in life. I worked hard to get ahead in life, and I did. I went to study overseas thinking that I will finally feel like I belong. Little did I know, the same shit happens again, and perhaps even worse. Let me tell you some stories. When I was in the land of haggis and whiskey, there was one time I had to visit a patient's house with the community nurses for a routine blood check. We had a machine to measure the blood INR level with us. Those people who are taking blood-thinning medications like warfarin needs their INR levels checked regularly. When we tried to measure the INR levels with the machine, the device malfunctioned, and right away, one of the patient's son turned to me and said, "Is that machine made from your country?" My intention was to provide the best possible care to my patient, and look at the shit I have to put up with. There are multiple times when I was walking on the pavement when a bunch of white dudes on their scooters just rode past me, yelled and screamed as they passed and showed me their middle finger. I was minding my own business. What was their problem with me? Some of my other friends had the typical ching chong whilst walking in the street. And I thought to myself, is this what a civilized Western world means? I came back to Brunei and told my best friend about this, and he said, "Lain level rasisnya di sana tu." And I said, "Oh bro." It made me think that racism and discrimination in Brunei are different from elsewhere. Those who are racist in Brunei are mostly stupid by nature. Their discrimination comes from their own sense of insecurities. They are ignorant of the fact that Brunei, along with all other nations in Southeast Asia, have coexisted for thousands of years, during which mass migration and travel had blended all the so-called different races and cultures together. There has been cultural exchange happening since the beginning of time, to the point that if you trace the DNA of the Malays who think that they are the pure ones, I guarantee you that you'll find Chinese or Indian DNAs in them. They are mostly blind to the fact that there are way more similarities between us than differences. Because they are ignorant and stupid at the same time, I take pleasure in arguing with them because it's so easy to piss them off, and I like pissing them off because they look even more stupid when they're mad. I'll give you an example. There's one time we were training our new employee from our neighboring country to navigate through the streets of our village so he could drive to work. He reversed the car from the parking lot, and without properly checking that there was a car coming behind, we almost got into an accident. The driver behind came out furious, and my mother went down to apologize. Because my mother is not fluent in Malay, not like me, the driver behind suddenly said, pandai cakap Melayu kah? Kamu dari mana? Kamu ai siapa? I went down and said to him, nenek moyangmu yang turun kapal dari Cina tu ai siapa dulu tu? In contrast, majority of the racists in the West are smart, and perhaps more worrying is the fact that they think that they are better than everyone else. They are very subtle in their approach, making it seem like it is a joke, using the law, using the rules, or hide behind human rights when the only human rights that matter is their rights. These types of people are borderline psychopath. And with my experience dealing with people with personality disorders, the psychopaths are most difficult to distinguish from ordinary nice and charming people. They put on a show, pretending to be nice, but in fact is holding a knife at the back, ready to stab you at any time. These people are less fun to handle compared to the ones in Brunei because you almost have to be on par with them. But thankfully, I am no less charming than them. But the difference between us is that I use my abilities for the benefits of others. There are other groups of people who face far worse discrimination than others. In Brunei, those with South Asian origins were called horrible names that begins with the letter K. It is the equivalent of the N-word used in America. However, it seems that racism and discrimination in Brunei are decreasing due to multiple reasons. Firstly, the racist ones have mostly passed away. Time is always the great equalizer. Secondly, more young people growing up are less ignorant and more compassionate than previous generations. They understand that acting like a racist thug is not helpful for anyone. They understand that everyone on this planet deserves to live with dignity and respect, regardless of their gender, race, religion, and ideology. Lastly, a lot of Bruneians would have experienced discrimination from elsewhere in the world and now know how it feels to be judged by the way they look and act. More people in this country are empathetic than ever before. I am not worried about the situation in Brunei at all. I am more worried about the racial discrimination elsewhere, especially in the West, where some people think that they are genuinely better than the rest of the world. At least in Brunei, we are all a humble bunch of people who like to mind our own businesses. You can see how social inclusion and living in a safe environment could impact both the physical and mental health. Imagine having a kid which goes to school and gets bullied for looking or speaking differently than his peers. Will he or she grow up to be a healthy adult, or will he or she look for ways to cope with the discrimination by the means of smoking or illicit drugs that will eventually affect both his or her future mental and physical health? These adverse outcomes can be prevented just by being 0.01% nicer to each other every day. Thank you for listening. If you like our podcast, please consider sharing and subscribing to our YouTube channel for more contents. My sincere apologies if any of the words I say in this podcast has offended anyone. I do also apologize for any wrong information in this video and would take this into consideration for future episodes.